Hi, good afternoon everyone. I've just been given the wave to start, so let's get going. And I seem to be having a bit of heavy breathing on my mic, so give me a wave if I start breathing into it too much as I talk. So my name is Francine Bennett. I'm from a company called Mastodon C, who are big data specialists. And, here we go. Okay, thank you. So my name's Francine Bennett. I run a startup called Mastodon C. We're big data specialists, but I'm not actually going to talk about the ins and outs of the technology of that today. I'm going to talk more about the applications. And the reason why I think that's interesting for the people here is that I see huge potential for big data to revolutionize the public sector, and a lot of will for that to happen, and a lot of the gap is in the technologists and the technologies that can make that happen. So I really want to talk about some of what's going on in that area and why it's important, because I think the people in this room are actually could be very important in creating a lot of impact. So what we do for a living is we run Hadoop stacks for clients which take big or messy data sets and turn them into something of value in various industries. And a lot of our work sits at the intersection between technology and business. So there's a business need, there's a raw material in form of data, and we put together the tools which help them to meet that business need using the data. And we're a pretty new company, so we're just under our 1-year anniversary. Surviving so far and going pretty well so far, but we have, to my surprise, got involved with a few public sector contracts which have been really the most interesting, important things we've done so far, I think. And what that's made me realise is that although data isn't yet revolutionising the public sector, there have been some really interesting starting points happening, and I think in the next couple of years it is going to be a really big driver of how services in our lives change. So just to backtrack, if you'll indulge me for a minute. Oops, we want to have a slideshow. That's... no, oh dear, this isn't good. Okay, I seem to have a slideshow which wants to quit. That's not a good start. So we'll just do that. So just to backtrack a little bit about why I think this is interesting. So I'll just tell you a bit about my career to date, which might explain things a bit. So I started out as a mathematician, was really interested in pure maths, thought applied maths was far too boring and simple to get involved with. First mistake. Turns out that's the only kind that's actually that useful in the real world, although pure maths is awesome, it turns out to be not that applicable, hence the name. And started to go into academia, dropped out because I realised I was wildly unsuited to pure academia, and thought, well, I want to do something which has an impact in the world. So went into public sector consulting, wearing a suit, making PowerPoints. It was kind of okay as far as it goes, but after a couple of years I realised none of the PowerPoints seemed to turn into much action, and none of us really had any tools to make them turn into any action. So I got fed up, quit, wasn't going anywhere, and moved into a technology company, but still wearing a suit. So advising on the business side at Google, using lots of data to try and help the business decide what to do. And while I was there, mainly as a result of hanging out with the engineers, who I much preferred to the guys in suits, kind of realised there's a whole world of tools and technologies out there which, if you're on the side of the business and if you're a person who uses PowerPoint for a living most of the time, you have no idea that these things exist, and you have no idea how to apply technology to the problems that you're trying to solve. So you end up building these kind of horrific Rube Goldberg machines in Excel, and a lot of you have probably seen these in practice. They've been the cause of all sorts of giant cock-ups in banks and otherwise. So that's where I've come from, is gone through this sort of various career of being quite technical and then going right round to the business side and then coming back to a more technical side by realising that there are some really important tools that you need to be effective. And I've ended up setting up this company which is essentially solving people's problems with data using new tools. And that's been a really interesting experience. And from doing this, it's become obvious to me that that data is going to be very important to the public sector. It already is in a way. And there are a few reasons for that. So if you start to think about it, there is an awful lot of data in the public sector. So think about the organisations that exist. There are over 300 local authorities. They collect your bins, they dispose of your waste, they educate your kids, they run social services, they run mental health services. They do more things than you can even think of. And all of those things generate a stream of data. Most of that sits somewhere and does nothing. So there's a huge amount of material out there not getting used. Similarly, the NHS is it's actually the 5th largest organisation in the world. Most people think it's the 3rd, but it's actually the 5th. Does anyone know what the 4 larger ones are? No, almost. Yeah, the Chinese Army, US Department of Defense, so kind of the CIA, Walmart and McDonald's. So those are 4 things that are larger than the NHS, and the NHS is 5th place. The Indian Railway is actually in 8th. Everyone thinks it's bigger, and it's in fact not. But that organisation has 1.7 million staff, and I'm pretty sure that Walmart are making better use of their data than the NHS are right now. And that's kind of a sad thing for the world, right? So who would you rather be really effective operationally and in giving good service and in being very efficient? I think, I care a lot more about the NHS in that respect. So these guys are producing a huge amount of the raw material to be effective and to do great things, and it's not getting used. So that's the interesting starting point for the public sector. In addition, public sector IT is not good, frankly. It's a bit of a tale of woe. There are some really honourable exceptions to that, and there are a lot of people who've really tried to do good things, and it's not worked for whatever reason. And there are basically, if someone's trying to do something with data from within the civil service, from their view of the world, their options are, I can use a spreadsheet and build something from that, or I can use my enterprise warehouse if I'm allowed to touch it, and there's nothing else. So there's very little understanding of data options in between or different from those. And that's a real problem as well. So IT vendors who sell data warehouses are clearly not going to say, hey, you could just do a little MySQL database for this problem, that'd be great. So you get these things like EU Sprig horror stories, if you've read them before. This group keeps track of the things that have happened by people trying to use spreadsheets for the wrong purpose. There are all sorts of interesting ones, government budgets going wrong, all sorts of things breaking in exciting ways. Actually, even MI5 got some phone taps wrong as a result of trying to run their data in a series of spreadsheets rather than using appropriate tools. So there's lots of interesting things that happen when you're trying to stretch small tools to be too big, and it's very expensive to get the big tools. So there's a real gap, and there's not really a sense internally in the public sector that you can grab the tools for yourself. So they suffer even more than the private sector from this two cultures thing of, well, if you're properly cultured, then of course you wouldn't know about this technology thing, because that's all a different side of culture, and it's a real gap at the moment. But the good news is that there is a lot of will for change. There's a lot of a push to fix this, and there are some negative and some positive reasons for this. So the slightly sad reason is that there isn't much money around. So people are just looking to anything that they can to try and make public sector services more effective without spending any more money. So that means open source, that means using technology, that means using data. But there are also some really positive reasons. So Government Digital Service has done some really cool things in demonstrating a way to do IT well. And then the government, or particularly the Cabinet Office, has really latched on to the idea that open data, open source and SMEs are all things that they should know about. Also agile, although they don't quite know what agile is, they say agile a lot. So there's a a theoretical push and a requirement for government to spend a quarter of their money on SMEs within 2 years. So all of this is pushing towards hiring people like the ones in this room to do the work, or to these companies to do important work. And they're not quite yet there yet. So, for example, last week I was at a big government department who were telling me about, they're going to do open source agile SMEs. And then they said, well, because we're very good at agile, because all of our project managers are fully Prince2 trained to manage projects in an agile manner, which is just, there's something has gone wrong clearly in the communication process there. But so they really want to do this. They don't quite understand what they want to do yet, but the door is quite open. And so the stage is quite well set to do something good with data in the public sector. I want to talk about a couple of projects that we've done. The last point I want to make is they're starting to see data as a resource, as a raw material for doing things well. That's really cool. I think that's something that seems obvious to most of us. It wasn't previously obvious to them. And as an example of a project that we did recently, this was for something which was funded by DEC, the Department of Energy and Climate Change, a while ago. So they did this thing called Retrofit for the Future. They spent £17 million on retrofit technologies for homes. So they wanted the UK to get really good at retrofitting old houses. The reason being that a quarter of carbon emissions from the UK come from houses. Most of our houses are not new builds, most of them are old. Therefore, they need to get better at retrofitting houses in order to meet the targets. So it all makes a lot of sense. The program went pretty well. They built a load of physical stuff. They actually had a Cassandra database, which in itself was a shock that they had this technology choice, which was collecting readings from all the homes every 5 minutes. So it's inserting data the whole time from these loads of experimental homes. That was a pretty cool start. They piled up loads of data, and then they didn't really know what to do next with it. So they just had this database running for a number of years, growing and growing and growing and growing, and they got a bit stuck. So we ended up helping them to wrangle the data and to understand, has this program actually worked? Because that wasn't really built into the process. The good thing is that the results were really good. So they saved loads of carbon dioxide. They had reduced emissions in the homes up to 85%. So it was a really good end result. But it was slightly unusual that they collected all the data and they hadn't pre-planned how to use it, and they didn't really know what tools they might want or who they might want to do it. So it was a bit serendipitous that we ended up being involved in this. And the client in that case was smart enough to ask good questions and not to try and either buy a data warehouse or try and do it with a spreadsheet. And there's no blame, by the way, that attaches to not knowing that there are other options, because, of course, if you've never met these things, why would you? But anyway, I think Bruce talked yesterday about the details of this project, which the technical details were involved using Hadoop and Cascalog to turn this data into a useful product. But more importantly, I think what this made obvious to me is that the things that are obvious to us about what tools exist, what approach you might take, are just not obvious. I mean, they're often just not obvious to clients, but they're really, really not obvious to government clients. And again, taking me as an example, in my previous consulting job, I'd spent a number of years advising government on technology. I'd never heard of SQL. I had no idea what it was. I came across it, and it was really useful once I learned what it was and learned how to use it. But nobody tells you this stuff, and there's no in-house person who helps you with that. So it took me till I was hanging out with engineers to actually learn about these things existing. So it's really important to actually put the right technologies completely under the noses of people who benefit from them and explain what they mean. So there is a very, very low level of literacy in this stuff, and people love technologies that help, right? So from our point of view, it's not that hard to add a lot of value, because we're showing a whole new world to the people that we work for. Also, from that project, this was a direct contract with a big public sector organisation. So, as a sort of side point about working with government, I can't in good conscience recommend entering government tenders because it'll make you lose the will to live. It can take forever and it's really messy. But the useful hack is to just enter the ones that are under their procurement threshold because there's a level above which they have to go to an open process. It's awful. It sounds like it would be really fair in public. It just takes a very long time and it's hard. If you can go just under that level, then it's fine. Then if you get a sensible buyer and you can shake hands and make a sensible decision, everything's good. And then they're really nice clients because they just don't give you a hard time. They don't haggle. They like it when you do good work. So if you can get through the tendering thing, then I would, from a technology point of view, recommend working with government because they're lovely clients, and who wouldn't rather work for clients who you're doing something positive for the world with? And then the upshot of this project, which was pretty cool, is that they've also decided to open up all that raw data, both as a data dump and as an API. So if you are actually interested in that particular topic, speak to me afterwards because it'll be out in a couple of days and I can tell you where the bodies are buried in that data if you want to do anything with it, because they're actually really keen for people to use it and build on it, which is actually pretty enlightened attitude. I'm really pleased that they want to do that. So that's sort of data as a resource, which they're coming around to. There's also this kind of interesting movement with open data. And I just want to talk a little bit about another project we did in relation to that. So this was a really small project, but it shows, I think, a lot of the potential, again, for using data better and for surprising and delighting with technology in this field. So this was from the NHS who, they've gone on a real tear with releasing data lately, which is pretty interesting. So they want to get lots and lots of data out into the world, and in particular they've been releasing all the information about GPs' prescriptions per month. So they release this big flat file every month. It's about 100 million rows of data a year, and it tells you every single item that every single doctor prescribes in the country. So it's a really rich resource, and frankly I'm amazed that they did release it, because I wouldn't have expected them to. But using that data, we did some work with doctors on various aspects of it, and we found out the NHS has this real problem with irrational prescribing, they call it. I think that's the polite word for it, where basically doctors, by making poor choices of drugs, can waste about 1.4 billion a year on drugs. And the background to this is a lot of drugs have a proprietary and a generic form. Often the proprietary offers small benefits for a certain very small group of patients, but the underlying push from marketing efforts can be to try and persuade doctors to prescribe those drugs to everybody. And the proprietary forms are usually sort of 10 to 20 times more expensive. So the NHS gets a bit upset about this, but they can't tell doctors what to do. The doctor has to do the right thing for the patient. But they really just want people to prescribe even amounts of these drugs. So we looked at one of those classes in particular of a drug called statins, which loads of people receive, and just analysed the data around that using open data, not using anything particularly wacky. And just mapped up the variation in prescribing of proprietary versus generic statins. And this was a really interesting one because there's pretty broad agreement that statins are all much of a muchness, so there's no reason to see any variation. When we mapped it up, in fact, you can see there is an awful lot of variation. So some areas had about 10% of the proprietary form, which are the pale areas. Some had about 1/3, or I think the highest was about 37% with this proprietary form. So there was huge variation here. And what interested and surprised me about this was that the NHS Commissioning Board, who run the NHS, were shocked and amazed and really wanted to use this. Now, this was based on their own data that they had publicly released a good while ago, and they knew this was an issue that they wanted to solve, and yet they had not had the tools or the ability to put together this picture. So by using things that are not that crazy, we did something quite new. And there's a lot of press got really interested in this. And you know, people from the NHS and from the Department for Business Information and Skills are saying, well, how do you do this magic? Can you do it again on another data set? So there's a lot of room to be really, really useful here. So I think that's most of what I wanted to go through. I was just on the point of open data. These kinds of open data projects are really enabled by government policy now. So there is a really positive and I think real push to release data wherever possible. That's not only cool if you want to do sort of journalistic or campaigning type things, but it's also interesting if you want to do useful things for government, because if it's out in the open, you don't have to have arguments about permission to see things or IP and so forth. You can just use it to build useful things on a commercial or a free basis. So, and this talk was pretty short, but hopefully that's set the scene for what the potential is for big data to be really important to the public sector. I don't know what the next really big thing is going to be in that area, but I know there are so many opportunities. I think it won't be long before something important happens. So yeah, that's really about what I wanted to say. So I think the takeaways. Sorry you didn't learn anything new about Java in this talk, but hopefully it's given you some ideas of how to apply Java, which was more the point. The takeaways really are that the public sector generates an awful lot of data, more than you might think, and it's a really, really untapped resource. And historically, unfortunately, government hasn't had the tools or the knowledge to know what to do about it. So using data has been an expensive and frightening thing in the past. They are starting to realise that there are tools and knowledge out there that they can use to make it cheaper and accessible. Also, with a good kick from GDS, there's this dawning vision of open source, open data, doing things in an agile way, being data-led. So that there's a lot of rhetoric. Some of that is understood by the people saying it, some of it is not, but the rhetoric is helpful nonetheless. And it's up to developers really now to take up this opportunity, I think, so that there's a lot of will for things to happen, but the skills are like the skills of people in this room to actually make it happen and to do the actual stuff that needs to go on. And really, from my point of view, working for government it is good business, but more to the point, it's also pretty good karma to be working in this kind of field. So I think it's a very positive kind of work to do when you get the chance. So I think I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much, and I think we've got now got time for questions. Oh, yeah. Yeah, there are a number of ways. So actually government, because of this SME push, they're actually now holding events, SME engagement events, where they say, come to our event, we really want to buy from you, so we want to explain about what we do and what we want to buy so that we can buy from you more easily. So they're actually, the government is just running events the whole time to make it easier for them to buy stuff from SMEs, because they don't really know how, but they want to try and make the contacts. Sorry, yeah. Data.gov.uk. So the question was, where would you find open data? And there's one core repository, which is data.gov.uk. There are a few others dotted around, but that's accumulating everything in one place. So, on the right?
Yeah, I saw Bruce's talk yesterday.
Yeah.
Talk about the statins.
Yeah.
Who pointed you in the direction of statins in the first place? So someone must have that inspiration to say, we've got this data. So was you guided by your sponsor?
Yeah, definitely. So the question was, what pointed us in the direction of statins in that health example? The answer was that the doctors we were working with said, you know what, we really want to understand this prescribing variation thing. We suspect that there's loads of variation, and we know that holistically it's a problem. So we've got this £1.4 billion figure, and we just don't know if that's just everyone overprescribes a bit or if there's big variations. So they just said, okay, this drug are bad, this drug are good. Can you look at the variation? Yeah, on the right there.
Regarding the regional discrepancies versus the generic, I mean, was that something that was you suspected that, and were you able to, was someone able to explain why it looked like it was kind of the northeast and the southeast?
Yeah, theories vary on why the discrepancies. The reason that we did the analysis in the first place was really that people thought that there was a discrepancy but didn't really know. There are some people have told me that it's partly to do with how effective the drug reps are in different areas. So when something is being pushed very hard, then the prescription levels go up, and you can actually see some of those patterns. One of the areas, Cambridge, was really low on that prescribing, and when I poked around a bit, I found lots of coverage that they'd taken a really hard line on this issue about a year before. So they managed to flatten out their prescribing of that stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
What about the other way around? Developers are interested where they start getting, pick up the data skills that they're going to need to talk to their counterparts.
Oh, so the question is, where do developers pick up data skills? And that's a really interesting question. So, and there are tons of meetups and things that seem to be mostly developers trying to learn data skills. So I think that's a really good place to start. But a lot of it is, like any skill, if you understand a problem statement, then you can start to search around for appropriate tools. I mean, it's not really a one-size-fits-all thing, but I think going to some meetups, looking at how people do things. There's a lot of these kinds of analytics projects are open code as well, so you can actually track through how someone did things. The one thing actually I would say is with developers trying to move into the data field a bit more is don't go too nuts with the tools at first. So what I often find is that developers talk to me and say, I want to do some crazy neural network predictive model. Frankly, I've been working in data most of my career. I've done neural networks like twice, and even then it was mainly showing off. You know, it's adding and multiplying is much more useful than you'd think. So just thinking about the question is much more important than knowing any crazy ninja maths. Yeah, on the left. Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, online courses are also a really good way just to get a broad survey of the area. I think that's a good point. Hi, on the right.
When we say open data from GovUK, what effectively the amount of published results?
Yes. Yeah, so most of the stuff on Data.gov UK is released on something called the Open Government License, and that's a really nice liberal license. So you can remix, reuse, and also commercialize, so you're allowed to use it in ways which allow you to make a profit from it. And that the government understands that that's quite an important aspect of keeping the stream going, is showing economic advantage by allowing people to build businesses on it. Yeah. Yeah, so the Guardian tracks it. They track the sort of interesting ones, and then Data.gov UK's got everything. But I mean, things like GP prescriptions, if you initially looked at that, you might not see much potential. But then if you've got an interesting question like, well, how could we make the NHS more efficient through changing prescribing variation, it suddenly becomes really interesting. So a lot of it's about having a question that you want to answer. There's also something called the Open Data User Group, whose remit is to prod government to open up data. And the ODUG is part of government, but they go and have the fight to get stuff opened up. If you say, I'd really like this information, it doesn't reveal anything private to individuals, and I can see a case for using it either commercially or for public benefit, then they will go and push that case for you. So there are mechanisms to extract stuff that's not out there already as well. Okay, any more questions? No, I think think that's it then. Thank you very much.